Hi everybody, welcome back once again to the Eastfield Gunroom YouTube channel with me, Matthew Morgan. Before we crack on with today's video, I'd just like to thank you all once again for liking the video, subscribing to the channel and engaging with the content. As ever, this video is proudly sponsored by the British Shooting Show. So the gun we're going to look at today is a manufacturer we've never ever covered on this channel. We have covered something similar, which was a Lambert, which was quite a while ago now. And the reason I want to show you this gun is because at the time, these guns were absolutely massive. It's a gun I will always have very fond memories of, having had a lot of them through my hands in my years in the gun trade. And not dislike the Lambert, this manufacturer is sadly no longer with us. So without further ado and more waffling, it's a Laurona. So Laurona is, yes, another Spanish manufacturer. We looked at Lambert. I will make comparisons to Lambert because at the time they were almost kind of head-to-head for much of their manufacturing life, so to speak. Laurona was a company that was founded in the Basque region of Spain in Eibar, which was where Lambert came from, where Victor Sarasquita came from, where Victor Aranberry came from. All the very famous or semi-famous Spanish gun makers were all in the same kind of region. Like I said before, there's very little left now. I think AOA have even gone since we last produced an AOA video, which is a massive, massive shame. And we're pretty much left solely, I believe, with Kemen today as a Spanish manufacturer, which if you go back 30, 40 years, there was absolutely tons of them. Now, Laurona themselves founded in 1941, and I think, I can't find out exactly, but from my memory, about 2008-ish, maybe 2010, maybe even slightly before that, is when they went to the wall, following some kind of amalgamation with Zabala, which again is another very, very famous Spanish manufacturer that is sadly no longer with us. Now, I wanted to show you one of these guns because I get asked all the time about, do I buy a new gun, do I buy a used gun? You know, are there any pitfalls to buying a gun that's 30 or 40 years old, or should I be buying one of the new kind of cheaper offerings from, I'm going to give Turkey as the example because they are the prime manufacturers of the lower price guns that we get here in the UK. So my answer to that is not completely straightforward, but I'm going to cover as much as I can in today's video. So the thing with Spanish guns, they've always been renowned for their durability and the fact that they were very, very solid. During the 70s, 80s and 90s, there was absolutely tons and tons of guns being knocked out. And to be fair, of all the guns I sold here in the UK from the sort of 90s to the mid 2000s that were Spanish, very, very rarely did they go wrong. Now, this gun we're going to look at today is a 1995 model, so it's kind of like towards the end of Laurona's manufacturing history. So start with the action. Now, it looks a little bit like a selfie frame for Instagram, but it's not. It's just a basic black action gun with very minimal border scroll work. Now, Laurona were kind of famous for that kind of gun. They didn't actually make anything that was super, super ornate. I have seen a few side-by-sides throughout the years that have been quite pretty, but as a rule, it was just about the fact that they were workhorses, they were solid, they were reliable, and they were durable. So this is a matte finish action with this kind of gold stroke yellow borderline engraving. And this is actually a trap version. They made them in sporters. I would say primarily they were probably most famous for their field guns throughout the world. Certainly here in the UK, the majority of the guns I can recall were kind of the old 83 MGs, which were very, very good in the fact that there's quite a lot of things that Laurona, I wouldn't say pioneer, but were certainly famous for. And one of those is an articulated front trigger. Now, what that basically meant is if you got a double trigger gun, a bit like a lot of the game guns, it meant that the front trigger actually moved so that when you pulled the rear trigger, your finger didn't slam against the front trigger and give you any kind of discomfort from the recoil, from the inertia from the shotgun. On top of that, they also made a trigger system whereby even if you got a gun that was double trigger again, both triggers would fire both barrels, but in a separate order. How cool is that? Plain black action, Laurona trap in big gold letters. We've got a matte finish trigger guard. You can just see that the gun is fairly inexpensive, but also very well put together and very rugged. Not dissimilar to something like a Bakel, for example. On the other side, shock horror, we've got the picture frame again with the little zigzags, and we've got Laurona again. It's simple, it works. At the time, this is 1995, a lot of black action guns around, Beretta Onyx, you've got some of the Browning Satori's with black action, obviously you've got Bakels, so it kind of fitted in with the style of the period. When you close a Laurona, a bit like a Lambert, it just feels solid, doesn't feel particularly refined, it's not like closing a Parazzi or anything like that, but you just know it isn't going to blow when you pull the trigger. So we've got a matte black top lever, matte black back strap, big chunky selector so you can decide which barrel you want to fire first, bottom or top. And of course, it is a multi-choke, and that completes the single selective trigger system. This is a 30-inch gun of trap specification, as you can see by the bottom of the action. Now, interestingly enough, we look at the back end of the barrel, as you can see, it looks like nothing else. It's a bit like a Space Invader from the 1980s. But what you've got to remember is the lockup on that is so positive because it goes in both sides of the action. It's going to just last and last and last and last and take an awful lot of punishment. Its ejector, I can't quite work out why it's got number 2 on the ejector and number 2 on the trigger. Maybe it was a question of that because some of these guns were put together by hand, there was bits and pieces in a tub and that's how you put them together, who knows. There's a little bit of engine turning hiding under the original bluing, spring-loaded ejectors, and the barrels themselves. This is another exciting bit. So if we look underneath, and we've got 4 little feet. Again, that's not dissimilar to the design of a kind of a, an SO almost. Obviously, this is made at a much, much lower price, but you can see where they've kind of got their inspiration. So the barrels themselves, we've got some nice gloss bluing, 30-inch with a tram line, about 10 mil. So obviously, it's kind of taken that from the Browning stable, I would have said. No centre bead, red foresight bead. And interestingly enough, we've got floating barrels. Now, the whole idea with that is, of course, that it helps with the heat dissipation, but also it makes the barrels a little bit lighter and a little bit more maneuverable. Now, I would have said, this being a Spanish-made gun from the 1990s, it was probably a gun that was designed for shooting Olympic trap. One of the things that is so good about the likes of Laurona and Lambert is the barrels are proof to such a high pressure. There's barely a cartridge you can't put in them. This is proof to 1200 bar. It's 3-inch chamber. So if you wanted a very, very low cost gun to do absolutely everything with, this particular one is a multi-choke as well, so you could use steel with it. This has to be considered because these guns can be picked up for peanuts. And in essence, yes, they're a bit agricultural, but they are excellent. The barrels are, apart from the center rib removed, are of course ventilated in the rib department, and also slight ramp at the back, which again, if you go back to the 1990s, it was a popular thing. You had Perazzi trap guns that had step ribs on, and of course, this little Laurona. So on the barrels, it mentions that it's of course made in Spain. It's mentioned that it's Eibar, which is of course the region it was manufactured in, and we've just got the proof marks, etc., just to finish the job off. Now, interestingly enough, I don't know whether I covered this in the Lambert video or not. Bit more boring Spanish trivia for you, but the actual serial number usually relates to the proof house where the gun was proofed in terms of the start of it, and the last bit is the actual number of the gun. This one finishes with 95, which means, of course, it's a gun made in 2007. No, 95. Right. If we have a look inside the action, again, you can just see a lot of metal going on, very, very solid lockup. It's got a sliding bottom plate. Again, not dissimilar to a Browning, but that's kind of where the resemblance ends, because you could argue that this gun is actually quite unique in its manufacture and its appearance. Now, before we move on to the wood and the rest of the bits and pieces, one of the reasons I wanted to show you this gun is because these guns at the minute, like I said, can be picked up for absolute peanuts. Case in point, you may have seen the videos we've done down at Harperfield Auctioneers. Guns like that are 10 a penny in places like that. You've got Lamberts, Lauronas, Sarah Squeezers, Aaron Berries. Don't get me wrong, there is some absolute garbage that the Spanish turned out at the same kind of time. But if you go with a Lambert or you go with a Laurona, they will give you a lot of years of shooting, most likely trouble-free. And you are looking at, in some cases, less than 100 quid to own one of these. It is crazy. Onto the woodwork now. Lacquered finish, you can see it's not kind of a traditional oil finish because of its appearance. It's a lot more shiny, but that's a really good thing because it never rains in Spain, only on the plain. But it does mean that it is very, very durable in all weathers. This gun, of course, was imported to the UK where it never stops raining. Now, one thing that impressed me with this particular gun, again with it being a lowish cost item, is it's actually got a factory palm swell. This is a left-handed gun. If you bought a gun in the 1990s, you hardly ever got a palm swell. And if you wanted a left-hand one, it was usually a case of having them bent at the suppliers or the importers. So to get a gun that's got a factory left-handed palm swell for left-handed people is quite impressive. So we've got the left-handed palm swell, triple point checkering, which we like. Trap stock, I haven't measured it, but I'm going to go along the pretense it's probably like 32, 42. Typically on a trap stock, you get about 10 mil a drop. So that is about where it will be, and that would make perfect sense. I think this is the original recoil pad. but it is slightly poorly fitted. It may have been in a box somewhere for years and the stock shrunk and been put back on. I don't know. However, traditionally I would have thought it might have had more of a ventilated trap style recoil pad because it's a trap gun. The stock length is 14.5 inches, and as you can see, the wood quality is pretty basic. But what you've got to remember with that is it will barely kick and it will certainly not break, which again, if you're buying a gun from somewhere like an auction or somewhere like that, it gives you that added peace of mind that what you're going to buy is going to give you some good quality service. Forend, beaver tail forend, it had to be. I'm not quite sure about these little lines on top of here. Obviously the idea with these grooves is so you can get a nice comfortable grip if your hands are sweaty or whatever, but I think with the checkering as well, it's probably a bit too much, and if you look closely, it looks just a bit like some kind of chocolate wafer. Lacquered finish again, very basic in terms of the operation of the catch for the forend. It's typical of what you would see of the era. You know, you could look, it looks like a Rosinia, Perazzi, any kind of thing like that, because they all worked exactly the same. 2 screws inside, a little bit of a recess where the barrels sit, nicely fitted. And like I said, you don't pick this gun up and think, oh, it's a cheap gun. You just think it feels very, very solid, practical, it's usable, and that is, of course, the main point. For argument's sake, if you looked high and low here in the UK for a left-handed trap gun with multi-chokes and a factory left-handed palm swell, you wouldn't have a lot to choose from. So this gun weighs 8 pounds 2 ounces, which from a 30-inch point of view is probably about right. One thing I did notice actually on the barrels, which I forgot to mention, is the barrel weight is also stamped on the barrel. I think it was 1512, which is quite light, which would make sense and tie in with the OT usage or application and these floating barrels. Balance-wise, I'll tell you what, for a gun that costs next to nothing these days, that's not bad at all. And if I look at the comb height, obviously I guessed about 32-42. I would say that's a pretty good estimate on top of that. Now, again, one of the reasons I picked this particular gun is I always try and go for something that's original and it's got all its bits and pieces. Take a look at this. A genuine, original Laurona ABS case. Now, it feels like, you know, when you used to get a Kinder Surprise as a child and you used to get the plastic thing inside, the quality of the plastic doesn't feel as good as that, to be fair. It's got Laurona embossed in the top. It's nice and compact, to give you that. So if someone was shooting a limpet trap all over the world, as you would expect, they can chuck it on various Tiger Moth planes or whatever was flying around at the time and get to their destination. Got some clasps on the front with some genuine rust. Look at that. I hope to God these furry bits inside are genuine and that, of course, no animals were harmed in the making of this ABS case. So in this little black box, which is not original, it's actually a Teague precision choke box. Inside we've got a set of multi-chokes, which if you look, doesn't look dissimilar to a Browning Invector, and it's a little bit longer. Also, incidentally, the barrel bore on this gun is 18.4, so you would expect kind of a shorter choke. We have got the Allen key for adjusting the trigger, some more chokes, and hiding in the bottom of here, it's not my daily medication, it's another spare trigger. Now the quality of that, just picking that up, much heavier than, for example, a Browning one, and you get 2 for the price of 1. Now I mentioned when we talked about the barrels, the fact that these guns are massively, massively overproofed. They put huge charges through them at the proof houses to mean that they are absolutely belt and braces in terms of pressure testing and making sure that they are safe. Now what we've got here, we've got the original Armas de Fuego. Now I remember that being a Renault when I was growing up. Proof certificate. It says here, of course, the address of the Eibar proof house. It's got the serial number of the gun, 12 gauge, 70mm chambers, 18.4 bores. The variable, that's obviously a multi-choke. 1519 is actually the barrels, and it's got 76mm or 3-inch chambers. That was proofed in 23rd of March in 1995. Not only have we got that, we've got the original guarantee from Laurona, Spain, which says it's all in Spanish. And it's also run out. So that's kind of it. So that kind of concludes this little Laurona. And for me, it was all about showing people that if you go somewhere like an auction, like Harperfield, for example, or you buy a low-priced gun, the chances are they're going to be as well made, if not better, than some of the modern offerings. These guns were built to last. They're still going. Sadly, a lot of these manufacturers are no longer with us. We've talked about Lambo, we've talked about Laurona. Lincoln are now pretty much defunct. AYA even is now gone. It's such a shame that once upon a time we had so many well-known, well-respected guns coming out of Spain, and it's been reduced pretty much to tatters. That said, these guns are still out there. They can be picked up for next to nothing. So if you are looking at a shotgun as a guest gun, or like this, you need a left-handed trap gun at minimal cost, don't discount one of these guns because they are extremely, extremely well made, and they can be picked up for the cost of a Greggs. So there we go, folks. Something really different this week. Not a shiny new DT11 or a Perazzi or a Blaser, but something that is without doubt a very, very well made piece of kit from the 1990s, not unlike Zig and Zag. Now, if you have enjoyed the video, do click like and do hit subscribe. We do appreciate your support. Don't forget to check out the website. Any question about this particular gun, feel free to comment below or contact me directly. This video, as ever, is sponsored proudly by the British Shooting Show, and from me and my Laurona. I'll see you next time.